Welcome to the show today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have another really exciting guest for you today. We've been doing more guest interviews. I've been on the road a lot, and we'll get back into the Monday episode soon with just me. But really exciting people that God has just continued to connect me with as so much of the body of Christ begins to unify under a common banner, and just a spirit of unity happening, I think, in the pro-life movement in the church to a larger degree than I've seen before, as people stop caring so much about their branding in their lane and want to unite to fight in this moment. And Ryan Bomberger is one of the many faithful individuals in the pro-life movement for a long time, who has cared far more about honoring Christ and defending life than his reputation or getting accolades from the secular culture. You may have seen him before. He's gone viral several times. He's a powerful witness against the culture of death, conceived in rape, adopted at 6 weeks old, into a multiracial Christian family of 15, an Emmy-award winning creative professional, an author, the founder of the Radiance Foundation. Ryan is happily married to the love of his life, Bethany. They are proud homeschooling parents, so you know they're doing the right thing, of 4 amazing children, 2 of whom were adopted. And of course, the culture of death hates Ryan Bomberger because he's a minority who they will accuse of having internalized his whiteness, and therefore entrenching the systematic hegemony of oppression that he's wielding against his own black brothers and sisters. A bunch of crap, as you know. He's a powerful voice of truth and life in the public square, and I hope this conversation blesses you and fires you up. I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted. Ryan, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, man, I like that intro.
Good, man. I had to talk you up a little bit, you know.
Oh my goodness, and most of it was true, so that's good. No, I'm joking.
It
was all true.
Well, Ryan, as you say, it's just factivism, right? So
yes, come on, 100%.
Well, many of our listeners to the podcast, Ryan, just so you kind of know, it's really cool because it's not necessarily an audience of a bunch of pro-life activists, you know, who are like regularly engaged in the pro-life movement. But our listenership is mainly just Christians and concerned families, young people who are just kind of fired up about righteousness and realizing how many steps tyranny has taken in the last couple years. And the podcast has grown exponentially, particularly in the last couple years, year and a half, because of the state of the country and the state of our politics. And so many of our listeners may not actually be aware of you. And so I wanted to have you on because you've been such a faithful voice in the pro-life movement for so long. But you are sort of a nightmare to the secular progressive culture, you know, as is Candace Owens and, you know, David Harris Jr. and these others. But you add a couple more sort of cognitive dissonance boxes to the culture of death: conceived in rape, adopted, minority, conservative, Christian, pro-life, masculine, toxic masculinity. I mean, you know, at this point, the culture of death is like, you know, it's like a malfunction. And so I wanted you to kind of just tell your story, brother, you know, is quick or as long as you'd like. Kind of start from the beginning, because all of our lives started from the beginning. Obviously, we were knit together in our mother's womb. But not all of us had it as a traumatic of a beginning with a degenerate father. Who cared more about getting off and abusing women than fathering the children he created. So, you know, dive into your story, brother, and then I want you to tell how you got involved in the pro-life movement. But start from the beginning.
Sure, I'm the fringe example that, you know, when we talk about any kind of issue, it's always the fringe that gives shape to that issue, and I am part of that fringe. I'm that 1%. That is used 100% of the time to justify abortion. Anytime you have a conversation about abortion, it inevitably gets to that question, well, what about rape? And I'm the tangible example, the tangible testimony, the answer to that, or at least part of the answer to that, part of the testimony that triumph rises from tragedy all the time. So even though my birth mom experienced the horror and the violence of rape, I thank God she not only gave me the incredible gift of life, but gave me the gift of adoption. And as you mentioned, a small little family of 15. And so it just, people ask, why are you pro-life? And, why do you even care about this issue? And I'm thinking, first of all, it's a human issue, so all of us should care about it. But
right.
it courses through my veins because I had two parents who loved the mess out of all of their children. Their three homemade or biological children, whatever you want to call them. And then, the 10 that they adopted, all 13 of us were loved like crazy.
Unreal.
And, today
10,
I have
adopted
4
10.
kids.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm an adoptive father too. So that's kind of why I'm so passionate about this, because adoption saved my life. And now I'm able to kind of turn that back around and to fight for the most marginalized. So that's a little bit of my background story.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, we often have abortion survivors on this show. Obviously, Melissa Oden and now others in her Abortion Survivors Network. And I love to have them share their stories just because of what a powerful counterexample it is to the culture of death. And now, obviously, you didn't survive an attempted abortion, but it is a similar story in the sense that it does provide this powerful counter narrative to the culture of death, right? It's like, well, with an abortion survivor, mom paid for an abortion, so she deserves a dead child. And then rape babies or whatever, they call them demon seeds sometimes. I'm sure you've heard that phrase, disgusting terminology.
Yeah.
They're used as the justification for abortion as well. But one of the common experiences of abortion survivors, obviously, is the trauma and the experience of learning their story. I mean, that's a weight to be thrown onto you at really any age. So do you want to talk to that? Like, when did you learn that aspect of your conception and your history? What was that like for you? How old were you? How did that shape who you became in that next season?
Yeah, man, that was such a catalyst moment. I was actually 13. And, teenage years are already just normal and calm. Not really. They're pretty much tumultuous. But you throw into the mix, you remember your whole origin story, the one that you've been thinking and sharing with friends? That's not exactly how it is. So apparently I did not understand at a young age what my parents were trying to explain as far as being conceived in rape. I didn't understand what the word rape meant. So at 13, in a really, let me say, a tense conversation, I was a difficult child. I was a handful. So for those who have stubborn-willed children, strong-willed children, just stubborn like nobody's business, just hold on for about 20, 25 years. It'll turn into something good. But anyway, I was in this argument with my mom, and throughout that conversation, she was saying, I don't understand where your anger comes from. It must come from your biological father, because I had extreme temper issues when I was a kid. And then she said, well, I just don't understand. And through that, it was revealed that I was conceived in rape.
Wow.
And man, I was like, what? What do you mean? And so she explained, and then she realized that I hadn't understood what that meant years earlier.
Right, sure.
And so that was devastating. I just remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror and just crying and thinking, why am I even here? Because for all those years, I kept thinking, well, why did she give me up? Why did she, that was my mindset. Of course, I don't use that terminology. Adoption is giving a gift. But I kept thinking, why didn't she want me? And then I understood, but I also understood from a very different perspective how powerful and courageous a decision that was. So it was a catalyst moment for me, because at the age of 13, I was in public school, and I gave a persuasion speech weeks later after this whole rewrite of my origin story. And I realized I had a story to tell. And I shared about abortion in public school, and it was a pro-life presentation. I watched the way my friends reacted, watched the way my teacher reacted. And I knew that there was something more than just having the story, but it was that I needed to share that story.
Wow.
13.
Wow. Where'd you grow up?
In Amish country. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. People don't believe me. I grew up on a farm. I used to milk cows. Nice. I had to shovel pig slop, mess. But yeah, I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I loved it. Yeah,
that's incredible. So, what was that a turning point in your life that was planting the seeds of factivism and the Radiance Foundation, that public high school speech, and watching how your peers responded to your story?
Well, yeah, because I didn't even understand I didn't know what abortion was. I knew what adoption was. I mean, look around my family. We got white, black, Native American, Vietnamese. I obviously knew that we were from different places. It's funny because sometimes people ask, well, when did you first realize you were adopted? I'm like, as soon as I could see. I mean, I could tell my skin color was a little different. But anyway, it was just, that was such an incredible moment. I remember the trifold display I had in that classroom for that persuasion speech. But I understood, one, I'm cutting out all these things, the brochures, because that's all I had back then. It was years and years and years ago. And I learned so much about abortion. I couldn't even understand, how could someone possibly do this? How could someone do this to another human being? And so it was an education on my part. And it was also this realization that not only did I have a reason to be against abortion, the violence and the evil of abortion, I had a story that could convince others about how evil abortion was. So it really was a transformational moment. It took obviously years and years for that to come into tangible form as far as my involvement in fighting abortion and promoting adoption. But yeah, 13, eighth
and
grade.
It's so powerful, brother, because it just testifies to the truth, and there are those in the pro-life movement and the conservative movement who we know who do sometimes like to use men like yourself, or women who have similar stories, or they might contradict the prevailing leftist narrative, but because they're a minority or they have a story, they get propped up. Because, the pro-lifers want to say, no, look, we're not racist, or, no, look, the black people agree with us. But it's not about that. It's just the fact that it testifies to the truth. Because as soon as 100%. You say, well, I'm a survivor of rape, or my mother was raped and pressured to abort me, so I'm the 1%. So tell me when my life began to matter. It's the same thing with abortion survivors. Like, so tell me when my reproductive rights began. Or as Melissa Ohden says, how could the act that nearly took my life simultaneously be my fundamental right to exercise? And those kind of stories and narratives, it's just like, that, malfunction, like, oh, and that's why the culture of death hates you. That's why Ed Stetzer hates you, and we'll get to that later. But so tell the story of Radiance Foundation then, Ryan. So when did you launch yourself out, not just in conversations by being a bold voice, but like, no, I'm going to actually step out into the public square. This is going to be our family's heritage and mission.
It was actually in 2009. My wife, Bethany, and I were facing a change in job situation. My wife had taught for 13 years, and she had already stepped out of teaching to be a stay-at-home mom, which we all know is a misnomer. No one ever actually stays at home, and it's just an insanely busy, crazy job, and beautiful thing. But I was leaving my particular job as a creative director for a very large organization at the time, and we had just finished the paperwork for Radiance Foundation because we wanted to actually talk about these culture-shaping issues from a biblical perspective. We wanted to equip people because we felt like Christians in particular were just so afraid to engage in these crucial topics. And so we wanted to launch the Radiance Foundation to equip and enable people to not only engage in these conversations, but help to motivate people with that education, with that faith put into action. And so 2009 is when we started. The economy was insane. It was not good. People thought we were crazy why would you leave your full-time job to start a nonprofit, which we knew nothing about running a nonprofit. So kudos to you for getting ready to launch your own. God equips and enables you to do these things. When he calls you to do something, he's going to equip you. And we had that assurance in our hearts. And so it was, next to salvation, marrying my wife, and having our 4 kiddos, best decision ever in our lives to start the Radiance Foundation. So that was, 13 years ago now? Wow. And we're going on our 14th year, and God has blessed us in ways that we never could have imagined, opened up so many doors. So, back in 2009 is when we decided to step out of the boat and put our toes in those crazy, stormy waters. Yeah. And it was an awesome, life-changing thing for our entire family.
That's good. Yeah. Well, and for those of you guys who aren't aware, and we'll put the link in the show notes, but the Radiance Foundation has some of the most creative and sort of edgy and, really captures your attention kind of content, both graphically and also with video. And so go check out the organization, and I'm sure Ryan will talk more about that. But Ryan, as a minority, as a black man who is pro-life, conservative, and Christian, again, these are, you're not supposed to think that way. You're supposed to be on the Democrats' plantation, remember? Which is just an ideological one today, but it still is very much a plantation, and you get treated somewhat like a slave if you dare to try to leave that plantation. And this is why it takes conservatives to do films on people like Clarence Thomas. It takes conservatives to bring awareness to people like Dr. Mildred Jefferson, because no one on the left wants to acknowledge the existence of these beautiful individuals, thoughtful, smart, articulate, and usually men and women of faith, because it just destroys the whole narrative. And so very open-ended, I guess, kind of question or conversation, but talk to your experience contending in the public square, given your ethnicity, your background, your experiences, when we talk about systemic racism, and the fact that Black Lives Matter not just is against school choice, is silent on fatherlessness in black homes, is silent on black crime, while they say Black Lives Matter, but also they're pro-abortion. And Alicia Garza, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, in 2019 launched Supermajority with Cecile Richards, the former president of Planned Parenthood. Supermajority existed to drive out the vote for Trump and to raise up young women to be activists for abortion. Oh, interesting. A black woman who founded Black Lives Matter, teaming up with probably one of the biggest white racists in the country, who leads an organization that lynches more unarmed black lives every 2 weeks than the KKK lynched in a century. What has that been like for you and your family in that sphere and in that context, when all of these sort of ideologies begin to coalesce?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to actually have your identity rooted in Christ, so it doesn't get uprooted by everything else. So my identity is not as a black individual, I'm mixed, so I'm black and white. So I guess according to systemic oppression and all that critical race theory garbage, I am both the oppressed and the oppressor. So
well, maybe your white half can pay reparations to your black half. You might as well profit off of it.
It's so insane, which is why knowing who I am and knowing why I was created, part of that is to be a reconciler, is to be able to talk about these issues that unfortunately some in our society feel like they can't speak up about, which, you have those who say, well, you have to be a certain hue to be able to speak about these issues. That's garbage. I mean, I think of Frederick Douglass's North Star, that famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who was also conceived and raped, by the way. But on the slogan of his newspaper, it says, right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is father of us all, we are all brethren. Truth is of no color. So we can't fear going out to speak, and certainly of no gender either, and there are only two. But anyway, it's been such an incredible ride. When we first started the Radiance Foundation, we lived in Atlanta. And sometimes it feels like the Civil War just ended yesterday, but we decided, we're going to talk about two really difficult issues, race and abortion. And when we did that, my gosh, the explosion was insane. Mainstream media, it was probably one of the most covered pro-life billboard campaigns ever, working with our friend Catherine Davis out of Georgia.
Too many aborted? Is that right?
Too many aborted, yes.
Talk about that campaign and what you guys did.
Yeah, it was we realized really quickly how fake news is when we launched this billboard campaign that said Black children are an endangered species, toomany-aborted.com, and it dealt with the history of Planned Parenthood, history of eugenics, talked about the resources that are available for those facing unplanned pregnancies, and of course it was a call for men to step up and to be fathers and involved fathers, not just the absent father, because it really just it touched on the epidemic of fatherlessness. Anyway, the billboard campaign started in Atlanta, about 80 billboards. And oh my gosh, New York Times, USA Today, CNN, MSNBC, the list goes on and on. I remember New York Times journalist was asking, well, where are you getting these numbers from? And I was talking about the disproportionate impact, where abortion rates are, at that time up to 4 times higher. In New York City, it was up to 5 times higher than the majority population. And she said, well, where are you getting these numbers? These just sound really conspiratorial. I'm like, they're from the CDC. They're not, now granted, right. The CDC is a dubious organization, federal agency, but They're directly from the CDC. And it was really remarkable the way that mainstream media responded, because I didn't fit their narrative. You know what I mean? I wasn't the white male Republican that, the old white male Republican, and I'm grateful for them. But then they get demonized for being pro-life. But NPR in particular, they did a cover, what is it called? All Things Considered. So they did a story on the billboard campaign that I designed, that our organization released, and Georgia Right to Life paid for the billboards, but we did all the content creation. And at the end of this offline interview, when they finally aired it, I'm nowhere in the 3.5 minutes. They had 3 pro-abortion perspectives and 1 pro-life perspective, which was Catherine Davis, but they didn't mention me at all. And that's when I realized, like, you have no interest. I mean, National Pro-Choice Radio, now National Pro-Abortion Radio, they're certainly not at all interested in providing balance.
I haven't heard that before. National Pro-Choice Radio, that's good.
Yeah. So that was our induction into, okay, mainstream media doesn't care about the truth. They focus on advocacy more than they focus on accuracy, which is what drove us to be the factivists that we are today.
Factivists, yeah. You guys coined that. I love that. So Ryan, one of the sources of constant frustration for me, and I can only imagine for you, brother, is the how the narratives have been built when we talk about racism, when we talk about the historic sin of slavery in America, and when we talk about abortion, when these ideologies begin to coalesce, it just creates really strange talking points, really strange opinions people have. And so, for example, I would love to get your thoughts on a couple people here, Ryan, if you feel comfortable addressing them. Okay. You have people like Lecrae. Okay, Lecrae, who I listened to for probably a decade. Okay, Lecrae has publicly shared in the past his regret over paying for providing an abortion. Early on in his earlier parts of his spiritual walk, he was heavily influenced by John Piper, who has been pretty solid advocate of the unborn until September or October of 2020. In a garbage piece, which I talked at the time, but basically he said the sin of pride, Trump, he wouldn't say it, and the sin of killing babies, Biden. He wouldn't name the politicians, but it was very clear what he was talking about. Well, all sins equal, Ryan. So it's kind of pride. Pride leads to death because all sin leads to death. Abortion leads to death. So I guess the national sin of genocide is kind of morally equivalent to the personal foibles and pride of a president. So therefore, maybe don't vote at all, or maybe you do have spiritual license to vote for Biden because the pride of sin destroys a nation too. That was the premise of his article. So I don't really trust John Piper anymore on some of these moral issues, but he was heavily influenced by John Piper. And in the last few years, Lecrae has had kind of this deconstruction journey and then reconstructing his faith. And now he's BFFs with Phil Vischer over at the Veggie Tales, who, was pushing the Democrat policies decrease abortion rates talking point. Ryan, right, remember that one?
Right.
So therefore, while I, Phil Vischer, am personally pro-life, I'm also whole life. And so the Democrat Party has a more consistent ethics, seamless garment of life because they're good on other life issues like Bernie Sanders, like universal health care and universal basic income and sex trafficking and poverty. And I'm prostituting my individual biblical mandate to love neighbor to the government so that I can feel really compassionate. Those are life issues too, and Democrats are better at those, Ryan. So while they lynch babies in the womb, I'm going to overlook slaughtering children in the womb in order to secure quality of life outside the womb. But don't worry, I'm really pro-life. So Lecrae was heavily influenced by Phil Vischer in the last season, and he was on his show with him, and then Lecrae started pitching some of these talking points too. But he says, no, don't worry, I'm really pro-life. And then what really took the cake, Ryan, was when he performed at a Get Out the Vote rally for Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. And thanks to his efforts, he was part of helping get out the vote for those men, which resulted in them both getting those senator seats in Georgia, which made the Senate go 50-50 with Kamala Harris as the tie-breaking vote. I don't think it's unfair to say, Ryan, that there is a lot of unborn blood on Lecrae's hands for helping cooperate in ensuring that the Senate goes 50-50 with a tie-breaking vote by the most pro-abortion politician in American history, Kamala Harris, who makes Obama look like a moderate on abortion. So you have men like this who say they're deeply in love with Jesus, they are pro-life, and yet you have people like Ryan Bomberger, and you couldn't be more different than Lecrae. If Lecrae was on the pod, by the way, I have a friend, Tony McFadden. You might know who she is. Great pro-life voice. Yeah. She spoke at the March for Life. I've had her on the podcast. We did an episode called Black Pro-Life Leaders You've Never Heard Of. And she talked about some of her heroes, including Mildred Jefferson. But she told me once that, and we talked about Lecrae, of course, by the way. And she said she reached out to Lecrae asking for a conversation, and he responded and said, no way, essentially. So there has been multiple figures who have reached out to Lecrae to try to have that conversation about what I would call heresy, Ryan, heresy. Right. And he's not interested in it. So what would you say to someone like that? And the growing number of people like that who castigate men like yourself as internalizing your whiteness or some crap?
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of crap with that. Lecrae, I wrote an article about Lecrae and that whole rally that he joined. The internet post that he on Facebook, he posted about how he's politically agnostic. How are you politically agnostic and you're at a rally to vote for two radical leftists, pro-abortion, pro-LGBT, anti-family, anti-biblical, everything? I mean, how in the world do you call yourself? I mean, he's not even honest with himself. I don't think you know what agnosticism is. Plus, there's no such thing as somebody actually being politically agnostic. It's just such a. You hear a lot of these mantras thrown out by those who are on the political left, especially casting aspersions against the pro-lifers, conservatives, Christians. Pro-lifers don't care about people after they're born. Okay, that's a great bumper sticker, but once you peel it off, you realize there's no substance underneath. Lecrae, but this is the whole thing that happens all the time. They just throw out these little pejoratives, and they can never back them up. Lecrae couldn't back any of it up. I mean, for him to even say that he's pro-life and to have gone through the experience that he did, and you're now literally shilling for the abortion industry because Warnock, I mean, his war chest was filled in by Planned Parenthood, as was Ossoff. Yep. I mean, it's just...
I'm a pro-choice pastor, remember?
Pro-choice. Yeah, well, I guess if the killing of the innocent, if that violence is okay, then in Warnock's version of Christianity, everything is okay.
That's right.
I mean, this is the reality of the evangelical left. I mean, remember the evangelicals for Biden? I mean, what?
Pro-life evangelicals for Biden.
Yeah, the pro-life evangelicals for Biden. I mean, these are the same people. I mean, their whole mentality is that pro-slavery politicians would have reduced slavery. Sure. Tell me how that works. I mean, there's not even – I mean, there's no intellectual honesty. There's no moral honesty. Not that honesty needs a qualifier whatsoever, but – Lecrae, it's just so sad to see how far. I mean, the further you get away from the Bible, the further you get away from biblical truths, the more you can espouse the kind of nonsense that he's espousing. It's sad. I'm a firm believer in redemption. I believe that God pulls people back, and that God puts people in the lost lives. I mean, thank God he pulled me back, but Lecrae is lost. He's lost on so many levels, and it's sad to see it because he does have a massive influence.
He may have one of the largest, if not the largest, following of a explicitly Christian artist who always talks about their faith. Now, you and I would say, I don't know if I necessarily know what faith that is. I don't really recognize that faith.
Right.
But for a long time, we would have said he was more orthodox. And so to watch that has been really sad. And the giveaway for me, Ryan, has always been this with people like Lecrae. The smoking gun, the thing that proves it all is their silence on and cooperation with evil when it comes to abortion, because Lecrae became this very loud voice on Black Lives Matter, right? As did a lot of other Christian rap artists that I was really disappointed in, who were just parroting the talking points, but they became so passionate, vocal, and consistent in sharing about slavery and systemic racism and the disproportionate arrest rates of black men and the disproportionate shooting of black men. And I was like, well, maybe you haven't read Thomas Sowell. Oh yeah, you don't even know his name, but whatever. Conversation for another time. Right. But the disproportionate outrage between slavery from 150 years ago, okay, to more unarmed black lives, and this is credit to you and Radiance Foundation, Ryan, more unarmed black lives being lynched in the womb every 2 weeks than the KKK lynched in a century. Spare me your outrage.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about black lives being lynched now, and you have way more outrage and anger towards historical injustices. And according to the Washington Post, brother, 9 unarmed black men shot by police officers in 2019. Oh, by the way, 5 of whom were attacking the police officer. They just weren't armed with a firearm. So Washington Post still called it unarmed. So according to WAPO in 2019, 4 unarmed black men were shot in an unjustified way by white police officers. And you have entire movements and campaigns to raise millions under the talking points of systemic racism. But nowhere is there a greater example today of systemic racism than the fact that 3.5% of the American public, black women of childbearing age, obtained, according to the CDC and U.S. Census Bureau, 37 to 40% of the abortions. Doesn't that, Ryan, here's my question for you. Doesn't that prove the equity talking point false? Because it's very just in that sense, because you've got 3.5% of the American public obtaining 40% of the abortions. Isn't that justice? That now black people, they're getting more services of reproductive health care than white folks for what they represent in the population. There we have equity now, right?
But their whole sense of equity is so warped. I mean, and the whole thing of reproductive justice. I mean, there's no justice when the weak are harmed or killed. And the whole thing, they always compare it to slavery too. I'm like, wait a minute. So you had an industry that severed children from their mothers and profited in the billions. Today, you have an industry, the abortion industry, that severs children inside of their mothers and profits in the billions. If you want to compare it to slavery, let's compare it to that. And the fact that how in the world someone of my complexion can't even understand the gravity of the lack of personhood to say that, oh, wait, no, that group of human beings, you're not human enough. Therefore, I mean, it's such we have a culture that's so narcissistic, white, black, and every human between. Doesn't matter the color of the individual, but we're such a narcissistic society. And so to look at this thing as if, this is an equality thing. This is something that elevates people. This is something that empowers, the whole garbage about, bodily autonomy. Well, as Christians, we have to understand that our bodies are not ours. They are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and we're supposed to act accordingly. And so whether you're male or female, that takes a whole different direction. And of course, it can never end with, the killing of the innocent. So you have so many of these black celebrities, whether they're athletes, whether they're artists, standing with a movement that's radically pro-abortion, that's radically anti-fatherhood, anti-family, that wants, dismantle the westernized, concept of the nuclear family, abolish prisons, abolish, police departments. It's out of touch, not only with society, it's out of touch with reality.
With reality, yeah.
So systemic racism, there is systemic racism. And I always distinguish, there is systemic racism and there is specific racism. Most of what the Black Lives Matter movement and CRT, enthusiasts always talk about are specific instances of racism, not systemic. If you want to talk about systemic racism, talk about an industry that kills black lives disproportionately. 360 a day at Planned Parenthood. That's systemic racism.
Yeah. And so once again, it's the smoking gun, right? It proves it all. It proves how inconsistent they are. These people are not concerned with justice, right? If they were concerned with justice, they'd become pro-life. That victim class, the unborn, must be set aside. They must be filtered out with the theory that comes along with abortion rights. It's an inconvenient victim class, which goes to show you it was never about justice. It was about power. And breaking up American citizens against one another with these arguments of oppression. You're the oppressor class. You're the oppressed class. So we need the proletariat. We need the uprising of the working class. Except when the truckers had an uprising of the working class, suddenly the elite entrenched regime didn't like workers of the world uniting. Once again, we could go on and on for days, Ryan. Many examples that disprove the narrative. These people are not concerned with the ideologies and the talking points they push. It's done to accrue political power and to entrench that political power permanently. And any student of history should certainly know that. But brother, I want you to share your story speaking at Wheaton College. So I went to Westmont College. I was telling you off air beforehand, Ryan. Westmont College is one of the most progressively left Christian universities in the country. Okay, bro. Their emblem. Okay, it says Christus primatum tenens. It means Christ preeminent in all things. Except the prenatal Christ, apparently, at Westmont College, and all babies created in the image of the prenatal Christ, because my alma mater hires pro-abortion professors. I'm not talking about personally pro-life. You know that, the personally pro-life? No, I'm not talking about personally pro-life Christians, Ryan. I'm talking about professors there who told me in emails that I still have, I'm going to put in a book one day, that they support legal abortion. They believe it should be. And the political science department at Westmont, while I was a student, and I have the data, they did a study asking faculty, so teaching professors, their political priorities, who they voted for in 2008 and 2012. Over 60% of the teaching faculty at Westmont College voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012. So even if you have some pro-lifers there, they were still voting for the most pro-abortion president at the time, and many of them are actually pro-abortion. So that's my alma mater, bro. Wheaton has been called Westmont of the West. When I was on campus at Westmont, people would say that. They'd say, because we'd have like, what was it called when students would do a semester at a different school? I forgot the phrase. They'd come over to Westmont, and we'd joke, oh, you're from Wheaton of Westmont of the West, and then they would say that about Westmont. So anyway, that's the campus you were on, very similar academic climate. These are the kind of people, I say, Ryan, who love to get high off their own intellectual flatulence. They make themselves feel really smart. Here are some phrases that you would know: nuanced, complex, the gray area. These are phrases that the academic elites, Ryan, they love it. Oh man, it's like crack. It's like Joe Biden's son. It's just like it just makes them feel so good. And so Ed Stetzer is I believe the dean over at Wheaton. I did an episode 2 weeks ago, Ryan, called "The Shepherds Who Became Wolves." In one of my most controversial episodes, I went after Rick Warren, J.D. Greer, Ed Stetzer, Tim Keller, and several others. But Ed Stetzer in particular, man, oh my goodness, what a snake he is in the church. His man crush on Francis Collins, who's apparently a beloved brother, Christian brother, the disgraced NIH director who has funded the mastectomies of 13-year-old girls, tracked the homosexual activities of teenage boys, and called for unrestricted funding to embryonic stem cell research, and devoted record-level funding to fetal tissue research and fetal organ harvesting. Right. What a great Christian brother he is, says Ed Stetzer. So you spoke at Wheaton with a club there that had you out. And I covered this in my podcast, actually, Ryan, Ed Stetzer's response to your speech. Talk about that experience, and also maybe some insights you gleaned from it, and maybe, I don't know, what it tells us about the state of Christian academia and evangelicalism. Can you share that story with our listeners?
Yeah, that was a little unexpected. I mean, I've spoken on many different college campuses: Harvard, Princeton, University of Notre Dame, Penn State. The list goes on and on. I just assumed, and I shouldn't have, that Wheaton College, being an evangelical Christian college, was going to be a friendlier environment. What I didn't do, and I typically do before I speak on a college campus, I get the climate, I guess, of that campus. Sure. But I made some assumptions before going in there. My presentation was called Black Lives Matter in and out of the womb. And I was talking about the systemic racism of the abortion industry. Good. And then I was giving specific examples from Black Lives Matter, from the website, some of their founding principles, some of their manifesto elements, and I was showing how unbiblical they were and giving very specific examples. Well, after the presentation, which was a packed out auditorium, and there was a very, very long Q&A, which I think lasted maybe 45 minutes or something insane like that. Well, we turned our cameras off, and then there was a group that gathered at the bottom, and they started asking me questions I wish we had the camera running, but anyway.
Yeah.
Started asking me questions, and one of the first things was about Trump and the KKK supported Trump, and didn't you vote for Trump? Which none of that had anything to do with the presentation. I said it doesn't matter who I voted for, and I said it actually doesn't matter who the KKK supports. KKK and any other broken clown outfit can endorse any presidential candidate. Yep. I mean, yep. Trump, rejected the endorsement. And then it went into all these different strange things, like, one of the students asked about the collective guilt of white people and slavery. I said, well, what about the collective guilt of black individuals who also own slaves? What about the fact that slavery existed long before the chattel slavery, the transatlantic slave trade? And what about the fact that Africa is the continent where slavery exists more than any other continent on the planet? Who should be collectively guilty? I said, as Christians, we know that we have all fallen short of the glory of God. So aren't we all guilty? They didn't like that response. One of them started crying about, the fact that he was terrified to come out of his house during Halloween because of the KKK. I mean, it went on and on. So wow. the next day they called him. Yeah. Well, it was. And here's the thing. Steve Ivester, who was the dean of, I think, Student Life, I may not have the exact title, he came up to me afterward, after this second Q&A, he said, brother, I am so amazed at the grace in which you responded to these questions. That was amazing. And I thought, well, I appreciate that, because it was really hostile, and I was trying just to be calm, because there were some deeply emotional students. Well, the next day, that department called a meeting, and a day or two after that, they sent out a campus-wide email saying that my presentation was filled with harmful rhetoric, that it made students, staff, and faculty of color feel unheard, underrepresented. Hello, I'm brown, but you're underrepresented, and unsafe. That was unsafe on campus. That my presentation, which was a fact-based, biblically based, grace-filled presentation, made people feel unsafe on campus, and they demonized the college Republicans who had brought me in. They never mentioned anything about me, certainly not my own skin color, since they were all, fixated on race. Right. And they didn't give anybody a link to the actual presentation so they can come up with their own conclusions. It was a nightmare of months and months of the administration demonizing us, refusing to meet with us. They canceled a meeting I think it was 30 minutes before, because we asked to have one of our board members listen to the conversation, because we had to have one of our board understand what was going on. They refused. The leadership, Phil Riken, who's the president. It was a fiasco. And what I came out of that, what I learned from that, was that students are taught to fear at Wheaton and not to think. Yeah. I didn't realize how beholden they were to critical race theory, to Black Lives Matter. I mean, the cult of all of this, they have firmly embraced it. And Ed Stetzer, oh my gosh, there's so many things I could say about Ed Stetzer. Let me just say that he apparently was tasked by the administration to further smear me in Christianity Today. And I'm pretty sure those articles have actually been removed by Ed Stetzer. Wow. Just trashing me and saying that we were threatening to sue students. No, it was the Student Life Department. It was the administration that sent out that email, along with 3 student government leaders, 2 of whom never even attended the event. But don't worry, they're talking about how dangerous my talk was. Ed Stetzer, honestly, I have zero respect for someone like him, who never bothered to reach out to me, who just continued to, repeat the lies. Like, one of the lies they were saying is that I was claiming that racism doesn't exist. I'm like, you mean a presentation that was about the racism of the abortion industry? And I'm saying that.
Yeah.
Come on. Difficult. Anyway, so that's a long-winded version of what happened at Wheaton. We write about it, on our website, that people can see more of the details and the crazy messages and the actual email that I'm talking about. Yeah. That was a disappointment. It's actually scary to think that this is how Christian young men and women are being trained up in our supposedly Christian colleges.
Yep. Well, that's the takeaway, isn't it? Yeah, we start to wonder why we have not had the pastors on our side in the pro-life movement for so many decades. Well, no wonder. Look at the institutions that the next generation of pastors are educated at. And much of that holds true as well, Ryan, for seminaries. Most of our seminaries are about as much of a joke as our Christian undergraduate colleges. But I recall Ed Stetzer's comments, Ryan, after your speech, And he literally said, honestly, I would not have used the charged word safe that the students used in that email, but it does convey the kind of place we want Wheaton to be. A safe place to debate ideas and a safe place for people of color. Right, Ed, that was what Ryan was talking about. A safe place for pre-born people of color, many of whom are probably being killed in the womb by your undergraduate students who are sleeping around because you don't take a robust moral position on God's view of a sexual ethic, and certainly on whether or not we should lynch those who are conceived when you live outside of God's sexual ethic. That systemic racism is not problematic enough for Ed Stetzer. Why? Because it's politically inexpedient to his position rubbing shoulders with big libs who donate to fund his sort of spiritual career. And and what a disappointment he's been. Well, Ryan, as we wrap up, because I know it's been some time, this is in the news right now. We're going to have my buddy on the show soon who was involved in this. But this hashtag Justice for the Five is trending right now. Some pro-life activists, eclectic group of pro-life activists, Ryan. Some are born-again believers, and some are with the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, a bunch of atheists, vegans, love the cows, Democrats, but they're pro-life activists, which I praise God for. I don't think they can ground their moral case against abortion because we're just blobs of tissue. We're just atoms banging around the universe. Why are we more valuable than a cow? But don't have time to get into that. But praise God that they're trying to rescue children. They found about 5 aborted children in vats of solution behind an abortion clinic in DC. One of whom, actually, our friend Melissa Oden, one of her survivors survived Santangelo's hands, the abortionist at this DC abortion clinic. Disgusting man. And some of these babies were 2nd and 3rd trimester, bro. And some of their heads and skulls strongly suggest, Ryan, partial birth abortions, which the pro-life movement has been trying to tell the culture, while it's illegal, we know it's still happening. We know abortionists are still doing partial birth abortions. We don't have the photos to show on the show. I may do an episode next week and show these precious, horrific victims. But where are the social justice warriors, pastors, Ryan? Where are they? I mean, you have a legitimate example of current oppression, of current injustice happening right now, of babies illegally killed. These are God's image bearers, right? I mean, you want to, what about articulating the heart of God for the oppressed in the public square? Where are the pastors releasing statements and demanding justice? I haven't seen anything from Tim Keller and Ed Stetzer and J.D. Greear and Rick Warren. Where are they, Ryan?
I think the only injustice that really moves them is calling somebody by the wrong pronoun. That's our form of injustice today. You can actually, how do you even see these images? And in fact, even just talking about it, how can you see these images and not be moved as a human being to say, this is murder? Why are we okay with this? In the nation's capital, there's no gestational limit, so they could just be killed. No one ever checks. There's no accountability. And of course, we have in many of these states all these laws being passed so that an abortionist can't be held accountable for any reason. How are we okay with this?
That's right.
What will it take to wake up the church? We don't need denominational letters 50 years from now. Sorry, we didn't engage the way we should. We got those from slavery. Thank you. Thank you for being decades too late or a century too late. We don't need that. What we need are pastors who have courage to actually stand up and not care about getting less in the offering plate, not care about who they're going to offend, because guess what? You may actually usher in healing to those in your congregation who are experiencing this. But to allow this kind of genocide to happen and to see the images of those babies slaughtered and dismembered.
Yeah.
What is wrong with our humanity? And as Christians and as the church, we are the first ones who should be rushing toward justice. I don't even understand it. I don't understand it. I know there's a callousness and a coldness to some people's hearts and many even within the church that they want to see all these minor little things as injustice. Nothing compares to having life literally ripped from you.
That's right. Well, how many pastors did we see, Ryan, who were marching with BLM protests? Even some of whom did, to be fair, many of those did not turn violent. But still, many of these pastors, popular figures, some of whom I just named, some of whom I haven't named, but we know who we're talking about. Some major Christian authors and figures and pastors who posted the Black Square, and they also marched at BLM protests that were sponsored, put on by BLM people or the volunteers of BLM. Like, let's not pretend that this was there was BLM and then there was a bunch of super peaceful, Jesus-loving Christians who were concerned with systemic racism. No, most of these rallies and protests were put on by BLM activists on the ground. They marched with them. Why? Because a man named George Floyd, who was being arrested while breaking the law with enough drugs in him to kill a full-grown horse, while we can talk about the means used and whether it was an appropriate use of force or not, we have one example of a alleged injustice, and it drove out social justice warrior pastors like nothing I've ever seen before. But you have babies whose freaking skull is collapsed in because their brains were sucked out of their heads, and they were thrown in a vat of solution in an alley behind an abortion clinic. And that's just 5 of them. And I have seen no statements from any of these men yet in the past week since this has come out.
No. I mean, you got George Floyd, and yes, I thought the knee in the neck was an injustice, but any life lost, in fact, any life stolen, particularly an innocent life, as we're talking about with the unborn, that should generate outrage from anybody. I mean, the knee and neck doesn't even compare to the slaughtered, the decapitations. I mean, of these innocent babies. So people got on that bandwagon. All these pastors got on that bandwagon of an organization that's actually hostile to Christianity. I mean, entirely hostile to Christianity. CRT, which is basically the bedrock. Critical race theory is a bedrock of Black Lives Matter that sees Christianity as the oppressor. But don't worry, Christian pastors, you're marching hand in hand with people who see you as the oppressor. You can keep appeasing all you want, but you can't mold Christianity into the form that's acceptable by Black Lives Matter, that's acceptable by critical race theorists and apologists. They're MIA.
You nailed the word.
There are too many pastors who are MIA, and they have no excuse.
Yep.
They have no excuse. And that's why it's always the remnant, though. And I am encouraged because, honestly, working with pregnancy centers, maternity homes, adoption agencies, activists, factivists all across this country, we are that remnant that is fighting this evil. That's right. And we are winning victories. Is abortion abolished yet? No, but we're going to keep on working. And we'll keep on working after abortion is abolished.
Amen.
It's a lifelong fight to protect human life and dignity, especially among the most vulnerable.
Closing thought or two for you, Ryan, then I want you to provide your closing thought. But just as a word of encouragement, my listeners know this, but I haven't told you this yet. From the end of 2020 through the end of 2021, I spoke at more churches in an 11-month period, Ryan, than in all 11 years of my speaking ministry. And these are separate pulpits. These are different congregations. Right. At one point, Ryan, I was scheduled in a different pulpit. And this is big thanks to people like my pastor, Rob McCoy, and Pastor Jack Hibbs, and other warrior true shepherds who know how to take up their staff, and rather than just scratch their own toe with it, they know how to whack wolves on the head with it and gird up the fence of their where their sheep are kept and are actually fighters. And so they really helped me get into so many of these churches. And it was like a 3 or 4 month period at one point. I was in a different pulpit every Sunday. My wife's like, you got to stop. This is too much. You're gone every Sunday. So there is a stirring going on in the country and in the church. And bro, these were all California churches, Ryan. So there is a stirring. There is sort of that early awakening, as almost if from a long coma, as the church begins to realize, wow, this is a Kairos moment. This is kind of the fall of the republic. And unfortunately, it took some of their rights to be compromised, unfortunately, for them to start waking up and going, maybe we should defend the rights of the unborn. I'm like, well, I'm kind of annoyed that it took you experiencing oppression to speak out against the oppression of the unborn, but whatever, at least it worked. And they're starting to slowly rise up. we did a conference at Jack Hibbs Church called Love Life California. I put together 1,200 people in person, 400 online. Anthony Levantino, Melissa Oden, myself, Kurt Cameron, Nick Vujicic, Monica Klein, phenomenal, Jaman Onchukwu, and we had hundreds, bro, come up and fill out the commitment sheet of what they were going to do in their city to end abortion. It's sidewalk counseling, post-abortion healing, mentor families, committing, and then Love Life, who my ministry partner was like, so much response. It took them weeks to weed through all of the responses and get people engaged in activism. And so there is that stirring, Ryan, and it's been very encouraging. But you know what? I don't think we're going to see the revival that the church has been praying for until the church begins to tear down the high places. Closing thought, Ryan, thank you for coming on the show. What would you tell our listeners? How can people connect with you, the book you've written, and what would be your word to the church in 2022? Might be one of the most politically significant years for the unborn in the church, actually. Any closing thoughts on your heart, brother?
Yes, well, you can find out all that we do at the Radiance Foundation, radiance.life. The book that I wrote called Not Equal Civil Rights Gone Wrong was birthed out of this fight of an abortion industry that is just so inherently racist. But beyond that, abortion is a tragedy no matter the hue of skin. That's why my wife, Bethany, and I will keep on fighting. And I just want to encourage people. I know a lot of times we feel like, well, I'm the only one. Guess what? It's okay. Courage doesn't need a crowd. It just needs conviction. And my gosh, we need more Christians who have Holy Spirit conviction about the evil that is around us, about the evil, social injustice, whatever you want to call it, the violence of abortion. Honestly, remnant, just keep on fighting and keep on encouraging your brothers and your sisters who are the only ones standing outside an abortion mill, who are the only ones trying to get the pastor to actually say something on Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. Oh, wow, good. We get one Sunday a year to the issue of abortion. Way to go. Kudos. Just keep on fighting. Don't ever give up. And, of course, doing all this, speaking the truth in love. But speaking the truth in love doesn't mean being a pushover. Because Jesus even called some folks a brood of vipers. Come on. So for me, it's like speaking the truth in love with a little bit of edge, with a little bit of sarcasm, but we have to break through all that noise. Yeah. So love people enough to actually speak the truth and to live the truth. And my gosh, if we don't do something more, we're going to have more. We can't have the whole those images of the five, as they're called, I think everyone should actually look at that. I think everyone should go to the internet, look that up, and see that. If you don't have the images for the podcast, but they should actually see that. In fact, I'm getting ready to post that today on our social media accounts. Never give up in doing good. Our work in the Lord is never in vain. So I just want to encourage people, because it's easy to quit, because Satan wants us to quit. Don't ever quit. Literally, somebody's life depends on you never giving up.
And as one of Oscar Schindler's friends once said, Ryan, he who saves one life saves the world entire. And you have no idea the fruit that may come from one person's yes to God. How God will use that as you show up in obedience, not as an epic pro-life speaker with a big platform. We're blessed, Ryan, to have God who's given us some type of small platform to make a difference. It doesn't matter. Your one yes can mean so much. And my heroes are the team here at our church involved in sidewalk counseling, who don't have a big Instagram and Facebook page, but they show up outside of our 2 abortion Planned Parenthood centers in this area, and human beings are being saved. Last thought for you, Ryan. What if those 5 children were placed outside of the offices of Rick Warren and Tim Keller and J.D. Greer and Ed Stetzer and Lecrae and Phil Vischer, and they had to walk over them to get into their church office to prep their podcast or sermon the day before? I think maybe some of the talking points and false compassion might begin to come apart when you actually have to walk through the bodies of the children whose deaths have not bothered you enough to actually do anything to save. So, Ryan, thank you, brother. We'll put all the links to connect with you. Grateful for you. Thanks for your fearless and faithful voice, and we'll see you on the battlefield, brother.
Hey, Seth. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, we'll do it again. You're a blessing. Thanks you for joining the show today, guys. Hope that fired you up and encouraged you. Get Ryan's book, okay? You need to know the history of these ideas and these, I call them the intellectual fountainheads or figures in the secular progressive movement. These are the saints. Margaret Sanger, all the people she palled around with. You need to know the history, and Ryan's story is powerful. Get the book. Give it to a pro-life evangelical for Biden. Get it for them as a gift. Have a coffee over it and expose their bigotry. Follow Ryan and Radiance Foundation on social media. They have wonderful content. If you want to connect with me, head on over to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Give the show a rating and review. Helps us reach more people. If you want to support me, go to the podcast, leave 5 stars, leave a review. It helps us reach more people, climb up the charts. We really appreciate it. If you want to book me for an event, go to sethgruber.com. My speaking calendar for the year is filling up quickly. Would love to bless you and your congregation, your youth group, your pregnancy center. But honestly, Ryan is a hell of a speaker. And so consider him for any events that you're doing as well. Thanks, guys. We'll tune in next week. I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted.